And we are live. Welcome to this special once-a-month live stream hangout. My name is Patrick Coffin, author, dad, husband, son of God, co-founder of CoffinNation.com, and the organizer of not one but now two summits, Truth Over Fear, Unmasking COVID-19. My guest this session with this live stream hangout, which is simulcast on Facebook and YouTube and wherever we haven't been kicked off because we've been very naughty, and very evil.
Lots of thought crimes and misdemeanors.
Many thought crimes and misdemeanors, and sometimes fashion crimes, which is a whole other department. Dr. Leland Stillman presented at our last summit, and I'm happy to announce he's going to be presenting again. Really fascinating topic on the whole idea of, and it's hiding literally in plain sight, and that is the effect of light on health, the light of the sun on skin versus the artificial, fake, virtual, faux light of things like laptops and cell phones and tablets and that kind of thing. Dr. Stillman did his medical doctorate program through the University of Virginia. He was in residency in internal medicine at the Maine Medical Center. He's board certified with the American Board of Internal Medicine. He's published widely, and he's a great guy, and I'm so happy to hang out with him again. Dr. Stillman, welcome.
Thank you for having me. A pleasure to be here.
Light. Now, talking about light is like talking to fish about water. We take it for granted. It's, 12 hours of our day are filled with it. But you have a very interesting angle on our increasing dependence on artificial light. And now especially, of course, the more immediate context is the lockdown of the scamdemic and the presence of millions and millions of people, especially children, at home with their laptops up and their windows shut and not having the regular exposure to playgrounds and beaches and parks and that kind of thing. How did you stumble on this light insight?
I was taking care of very sick young people who were, and I think generally speaking, people have this awareness that young people today are not quite the same as they were 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. There are, and it comes up constantly in just my social interactions. I'll meet a friend of my father's whose daughter is 20-something and has got chronic Lyme disease, or is laid up with chronic fatigue syndrome, hasn't been able to work for 2 years. Everybody, when they actually start to listen to the people in their lives, knows somebody who's young, who's struggling with their health. Mm-hmm. And I became very fascinated by how do I help these people? And as somebody who was interested in natural and integrated medicine, I was interested in things like diet, exercise, lifestyle change. And I was nonplussed by the number of these patients who came to me and said, I've tried everything and nothing has worked. Mm-hmm. The really interesting thing about talking to young, motivated, intelligent people about their illness is that they will research every last possible avenue that they think may be able to get them better. And one of them turned me on to the work of a neurosurgeon named Jack Kruse, who ended up becoming a very controversial figure in the alternative health and wellness space, let's just say, which mm-hmm. is full of people with very different ideas.
Yeah, but and different ideas from each other, too.
Exactly, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, it couldn't be a more diverse group of people, but they're very focused on figuring out, well, what in the environment is making people sick? Because they're all, fascinated with the way that people have gotten better from, but by which I really mean we excel at treating diseases of our past, right? Give me a patient with overwhelming bacterial infections and dehydration, and I will save their life in a matter of hours with a couple bags of IV fluid and some IV antibiotics. This is the real power of modern medicine made manifest in so many people's lives. Mm-hmm. But where we struggle is with people who have chronic diseases that defy some neat categorization. And so people end up with all these various diagnoses of chronic fatigue syndrome and, intractable migraine headaches and whatever. And where I got interested in this was that the patients began to come to me and say, what about light? What about my cell phone? What about my laptop? Mm-hmm. And over the last few decades, more and more research has come out about light. Now, as I began to investigate the effects of light on humanity and really our health, the individual's health, it was Dr. Kruse who turned me on to this. He turned me on to the research of a German ophthalmologist named Fritz Hallwich, who did some fascinating studies and really brought together a group of an area of fascinating research about light and its effects on health, not only in man but in animal. Mm-hmm. And what really got me thinking about the decline in health, but also the change in our culture, morality, simply the way things are today was a chapter in his book that focused on the effects of light on reproductive function in animals. And he points out all of this, some of it very historical data, but much of it much more contemporary, right? And he was writing in 1976, so I mean, 50 years old, older than me, older than you.
You know, that's very hurtful. Let's just move on. Older than me.
So anyway, he points out all these fascinating associations. For example, the size of the antlers on a stag vary based on the amount of sunlight that has fallen to Earth in the spring months when the antlers are maturing. The size of the gonads on a wild animal will depend on the amount of light that the animal is exposed to. If you look at the chicken industry, or I should say the egg industry, right, based on chickens, obviously, they induce egg laying using artificial light. And then I began to notice the acceleration of changes in morality and popular notions of what sexuality was in our modern culture. And I thought, wait a minute, we have never seen the amount of and the variety of different light that we're being exposed to in society. And all of a sudden, our morals and beliefs and cultural norms are shifting radically. And no one has ever studied how artificial light affects human behavior, reproduction, sexuality, and sexual maturation. And the more I began to read on papers, the more concerned I became really that there was a link between changes in the culture. And I became more and more aware of the culture war as a result of this, because I really wasn't aware of it going through my teenage years and then in my early 20s when I was in my medical training. But then it became very clear to me that something was going on. There are a lot of people who would point to pesticides, chemicals in the environment, changes in people's lifestyles. You know, they're staying up later, they're eating worse food, whatever. But I focused in on light, and I became totally convinced that it's playing a significant role in driving not only epidemics of modern disease, but changes that your listeners are very concerned about, such as changes to our culture and really what is considered conventional morality.
We think of light as being invented by Thomas Edison, which needs an asterisk around it. The development of light as part of our everyday lives is not that recent. I should say it's more recent than most people think. People listening right now will have stories from their grandparents, which is, you know, World War II and World War I, where candlelight and lamp light on occasion, crackling fireplaces. Every house had it was sort of designed around the family hearth. And so this 24/7 fake light exposure is relatively new. And you and I have talked off air about the writings of Marshall McLuhan, who always talked about the hidden effects of a new technology. The highway created the suburb.
Yes.
And the idea of media being an extension of man. So the radio is an extension of the tongue. The car and the horse the neural system.
Right.
And so when you talk about a culture that relies so much on light for half of its existence, and most people aren't really paying attention to it. As you're talking about the change in morality as the culture wars have kind of heated up, and you see the two different camps, those who are pro everything to do with contraception and free love and licentiousness in that area, and those who are pro marriage. And I was thinking about just the thing we call the names that we give to things, like nightclubs. A nightclub is where you go out and you dance, sometimes with friends, sometimes with strangers. Scripture is full of references to the dark. St. Paul talks repeatedly of deeds of darkness, right? Don't live as though you're in the night. The night is far spent. The day is always identified with God, the light. Jesus calls himself the light of the world. So this is a long-winded way of saying something to this. We should talk about this.
And that's the interesting thing is that I then went back and started reading my Bible with this perspective, right? And things started to jump out at me that I had not really appreciated before. And I'm just looking at some verses that I've pulled out that struck me about this. This is 2 Corinthians 11:14. Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. What better way to deceive people than coming to people as the light, right? And the people coming to us constantly, right? Telling us that they're giving us the message we need. They have the information that will set us free. They have the answer to our problems. They're always, brightly illuminated, right? They're coming to us through these brightly illuminated devices. And, we can go through, I mean, I have all these scriptures written down, but part of this I got interested in and started to notice, wait a minute, all of the social media apps, they have the same color scheme. It's blue and white. If you ask me how to keep somebody awake, I'll tell you, give them a device that emits a large amount of blue and white light. In fact, aircraft displays are loaded with blue and white light because they know it keeps the pilots awake. And we obviously don't want pilots falling asleep, do we? And I mean, there's study after study where blue and green light keep people awake and keep them engaged. And this is the perfect strategy to keep people scrolling through your content so that you're making money off of the impressions that are going into their brain. Now, what happens when you chronically deprive someone of sleep is that you basically exhaust their physical and mental abilities to compensate for it. Right? I mean, it would be like driving 500 miles and then scratching your head as to why your car has just stopped by the side of the road. You've run out of gasoline, right? And so I have so many people coming to see me, and I ask them about their sleep habits, about their habits at night. There's always some feature of artificial light. And the more artificial light there is after dark, the more fatigued, the more sick, the more systems are really offline. Then I started to look at the data on, do people who are, say, transgendered have sleep disorders? Turns out there's a massive association there. There's also a strong association between transgender, whatever you want to call it, gender dysphoria, sure. Very strong association with anxiety and depression. And those are also very strongly associated with artificial light at night. So the more I started to look for dots where I expected to find them, the more I began to connect them and think to myself, my gosh, what if light is having untoward effects on people? Now, in my own personal life, I became very concerned about this because I started to notice this remarkable trend where the friends I had and relations, who had been most apt to stay up late at night, party too hard, or play video games, and not go outside and spend time in nature, wound up, for example, deciding to not have children, deciding to have transgender relationships, deciding to not pursue a career, for example, that might serve other people, however you kind of want to describe that. They fell into lifestyles that, for example, their parents were very unhappy with. Now I may talk to their parents and they may express serious remorse over the way that their children have chosen to live their lives, and they feel this sense of regret and this sense of loss. And it's tough talking to them about this because I have a suspicion that all of this lighting has played a role, and they had no idea that it was going on. Well, that's actually a really interesting question. So, when I explain this to patients, I'm often on Zoom and I'm often using my lighting and changing it around. And hopefully Marielle will not scold me for changing the lighting on myself. But basically, people need to realize that the color temperature of the lighting they're exposed to has a radically different effect on their physiology. So people watching this may be aware, the incandescent bulbs that some of us are old enough to have grown up with, they had this warm, soft, candlelight-like glow. So that's what I have on me right now. These are 3,500 Kelvin bulbs. When I change that bulb, that's a 5,000 Kelvin. I'm turning it up so people can see how bright it is. Those blues and greens delay your melatonin release. So I got all these people taking melatonin come to me and they say, I'm taking melatonin, but I still can't sleep. And I say, yeah, I know, but your body makes melatonin and it releases it after 3 to 4 hours in the absence of blue to green light. So you're taking the melatonin, but you're shutting it down with your cell phone. So stop shutting it down with your cell phone and then you won't need the melatonin. So people can choose and control what kind of light bulbs they're living under, and they can choose warm lighting instead of very bright, harsh lighting. And I've been amazed by the results that my patients get because they see a radical reduction in their onset to sleep. They see themselves becoming sleepy and wanting to go to bed earlier. Friends of mine and I have who are very interested in really seeing how well this works. What we found is that when we really limit light after dark, and I'm talking, one light bulb in a room, very dark red screens, very low brightness screens, you'll want to go to sleep at 8 o'clock and you'll sleep for 12 hours and you'll wake feeling more rested than you've felt in a long time. It's pretty amazing. Right, right. I know. Yeah. And they're remarkably sick. They have unprecedented levels of depression, anxiety, autoimmune diseases, ulcerative colitis, uh, Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome, obesity, type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, insomnia, sleep disorder, gender dysphoria. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on and on and on. I mean, it's almost like being a healthy young man is now a rarity. Hmm. Hmm. Yes, right.
But tell us about the effect of sunlight on the body's production of vitamin D. I probably even put it wrongly, but you know what I'm getting at.
I do know what you're getting at. And that's the thing about sunlight that has really defied, I think, simple categorization amongst the medical community. So vitamin D gets a lot of the press for the health benefits of sunlight. Mm-hmm. But let's start with and back up and really ask, what are the health benefits of sunlight? The best study on this that I'm aware of is called the Melanoma in Southern Sweden trial, where researchers were looking to see how sun exposure affected the incidence of melanoma in southern Sweden, right? Where people are very fair-skinned and they may get an excessive amount of light in the summer, but obviously they're getting very little, if any, light in the winter. So you expect high melanoma rates in these patients because you actually have, obviously, one, skin that's predisposed to getting it. And then two,
just quick insert, that's skin cancer form of, right?
Melanoma is the most malignant skin cancer. It's responsible for the responsible for the majority of skin cancer deaths.
Okay.
And to give people some scale of this problem, approximately 10,000 people die in the United States from skin cancer every year, versus 2.8 million dying total, 3 million dying total, 3.4 I think this year. Mm-hmm. Very small numbers of people actually die of skin cancer. In this study, what they found that shocked the researchers and the medical community to the point that it was published in one of the most prestigious medical journals out there, was that avoiding the sun was a risk factor for death equivalent to smoking. So to explain that in other terms, the people who smoked the most and got the most sun had the same mortality as the people who avoided the sun and didn't smoke.
It's stunning.
It is stunning because everybody knows that smoking is bad for them, but I think most people think that the sun is a risk factor for skin cancer when they think about how the sun affects their health overall. Now, whether or not that effect is true due to just vitamin D is actually a bigger question. So let's unpack that, right?
Yeah.
And before I get into that, I want to be really clear with people. The main reason people seem to get skin cancer is from the sun. And I joke with people that if the sun causes skin cancer, then spoons make people fat, because there are many other factors that determine whether or not you get A, cancer, or B, a melanoma, right? Mm-hmm. So the things that change whether or not you're going to get a skin cancer are you getting sunburned a lot? So people who get a lot of sunburns have a higher incidence of skin cancer. People who are using tanning beds also have a higher use of skin cancer. But what's interesting about tanning beds is that they're not like sunlight. Sunlight contains something like 1 to 4% ultraviolet light, and only in the summer. It's balanced by visible light, red, and infrared light. And some of the most amazing research out there, and I think that's going to revolutionize medicine in the next few decades, is the research on the effects of red and infrared light on human health. This is now being used to treat everything from infertility to joint pain to dementia. And it's sort of a not well published secret to the public. It's an extremely voluminous body of evidence. And I mean, you can pick up 2 or 3 devices, in the next 5 minutes if you want, that you can use at home to treat yourself. And I routinely recommend these devices to my patients simply because, and they'll frankly use these terms with me. They'll say, Dr. Stillman, I'm obsessed with my red light therapy panel because it makes me feel so much better. People don't understand the optics of red and infrared light. We've edited these frequencies out of our modern lives because we think that visible light is the only light that matters, which sort of in a metaphorical sense is like a great act of hubris. We think that we know better, so we're going to edit out the infrared portion of light and just use the light that we can see. Yep. Infrared light is what we identify as heat when we feel sunlight. Red is the next frequency up, and then you get to the oranges and the yellows and the blues and the greens and then the purples, and then you get to ultraviolet. What red and infrared light do is they heal the skin, so it actually can cope with insults better. And so now we're using red light to do things like heal burns or help people recover faster after surgery or heal surgical scars so that they have less scar tissue.
It's counterintuitive, isn't it? For
most
people at first blush.
Yeah. And it seems sort of unbelievable because we've got a medical model where it's all about, the scalpel and the pill bottle. But the reality is that light has got very well described, very well established therapeutic value that frankly is being left on the table in the vast majority of diseases that it could be treated by because it hasn't yet been embraced by, general clinicians the way that I think it deserves to be and the way that I'm using it in my clinic. And frankly, my use of it is only growing because I'm seeing so many good outcomes with it.
Right. Well, let's turn from that as a very appropriate hinge, because it occurs to me that our overlords in Silicon Valley are not going to include that kind of light in their devices. They're going to go to a different section of the spectrum. We've titled this how big tech is hacking your brain.
That's right. Yeah.
Nir Eyal has a book about this called Hooked. I've had Nir on my show. He wrote a sort of an antidote book called Indistractable on how to use the almost like a jujitsu style response to big tech companies that are very deliberately trying to get you hooked. This is not, oh boy, this would be a nice random outcome. No, they're all designed with maximal addictive qualities. Start the list with the fact that even what you and I are doing right now, when people are watching me and you and hearing us, we're not live. We're live in the sense that we didn't pre-record, but all of it's mediated electrically. It's mediated by artificial lighting, the camera lens, the speed of the internet, and so. But when colors are so over vivid, let's say to a game, and you're immersed in this, hundreds of thousands of pixelated lights at that rich, super vivid level, a walk in a garden or a forest seems dull after a while. It's just the classic steps toward addiction. Am I over-exaggerating?
No, I think that's fair. And what's interesting about it is that, the frequency of light that you're exposing the eye to determines the response of the brain. And so, the frequencies of blue and green, these very bright frequencies will turn people's minds on, and they'll activate catecholamines, which are norepinephrine, epinephrine, dopamine. These keep people awake, and they're the neurochemicals really of addiction. So, are the tech companies using visible light to addict people to their devices and make sure that they're staying on the app, continuing to scroll? I mean, I just can't dismiss the fact that they're all blue and white to some degree in their color scheme. And that's always the out-of-the-box option. Now you're seeing more night modes roll out. You're seeing more options for a night scheme, where the web browsers actually got dark trim instead of white trim. But that's really only because of popular demand. Yeah. And so, the tech companies definitely know this because they've done so much A/B testing.
Yeah. Even the sound of the ding for notification.
Exactly.
It's maximal hook. FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yeah. Right. Did you know that the food companies, long before big tech, right, they actually paid engineers to figure out how crunchy to make potato chips
I totally
so that they
believe
would have the optimal crunch factor in people's mouths to be addictive. This came up in my clinic the other day because a patient came to me and said, I just can't get over the crunch. It's so addictive. It is truly diabolical what corporations will do to get people to keep consuming their products, even to the point of self-destruction.
This is a really good point. I've had Dr. Nick Kardaras on my show. He's the author of a fine book everyone listening should read called Glow Kids. And he did a study of all the school shooters from Columbine onward. And they all have this one thing in common, and that is they're deeply wedded to hyper video game use, especially these really dark themed first-person shooter like Grand Theft Auto, Spec Ops. I'm not even sure what they're called, but they're first-person singular, looking down the barrel of a gun, shooting the enemy. And when he used the word addiction, I kind of inserted my skeptical devil's advocate question. You know, Dr. Kardaras, are they really addicts? And he said, Patrick, I have clients, patients of mine who are teens and adults who buy Depends adult incontinence diapers to play these games. And I said, what? Little naive me. Why? Because they can't stand relieving themselves. They can't stop the game. They have to use these diapers to stay in the game. That's addiction. And some of his patients have had psychotic breaks in his office where they can't, the hyper-realistic world of violence of the video game begins to merge with the real world. It would be a terrifying thing to see. So there's that.
Right. And this is something that was really, I mean, I haven't seen that because I don't deal with a lot of addiction psychiatry, but I absolutely believe it's possible. And from what I've seen, I mean, I just find this uncanny trend where kids who grew up with their parents kicking them out the door and saying, come back for supper, who didn't have a lot of technology devices, who grew up in nature, and particularly who had strong father figures who mentored there in something outdoors, hiking, fishing, shooting,
tree forts.
boating. What's that?
Tree forts.
Anything outside that was non-digital. They ended up becoming more successful, more masculine, healthier, happier people. And it became so consistent that I thought this cannot be anecdote. The thing is, it's not politically correct to ask these questions. And so when you look at the literature in science, it's been very disturbing to me to see how doctors have rationalized, say, transgender therapy. And they're doing it in a very aggressive way, where they're treating people with hormones, they're mutilating their bodies, their genitalia, often of people who are under 18 years old. And it shocks me how vociferous the medical community is about, say, forcing people to take a vaccine for COVID, and how totally silent they are on even whether or not this is a good idea. And from my perspective, their silence is really a tacit approval. They're allowing this to go on. They're comfortable with it. They don't see anything wrong with it. And that really disturbs me because, you know, when you go back to the basic physiology, when you start messing with sex steroid hormones, you begin to create disease. We know that abnormalities in sex steroid hormones in men and women predispose long-term to degenerative diseases, premature things like premature osteoporosis, women having premature bone fractures, which can often then be fatal or lead to fatal complications. You see associations with all sorts of diseases like metabolic syndrome, diabetes, obesity, which are risk factors for sudden death from, say, a virus or other kind of overwhelming infection. Not to mention things like dementia, which many Americans are now living, you know, in fear of because they've seen their parents claimed by these illnesses.
Yeah.
All of this is just being ignored by the scientific establishment in favor of the politically correct stance of being silent.
Yeah, I don't know when this all started, but it's part of this turn toward wokeism. You can see it in professional sports. You can see it in films, TV. You can see it in the scientific, psychological community. There's a wonderful book by Robert Riley called Making Gay Okay. And there's a whole chapter there on the APA decision of 1973 to remove homosexuality as a mental disorder. This very sentence is probably going to get me deleted or put it into a naughty corner. But he lays out the fact
Proud
that...
to be here with you.
Thanks. He lays out the fact that this was political pressuring. This is a bullying tactic. And they were very, very good at it, very targeted. It's laid out, by the way, in a book I recommend people read by two gay activists, Hunter Madsen and Marshall Kirk. It's a very fine book. You should read what their playbook is. It's called After the Ball, Our 10-Year Plan to Rid America of Its Fear and Hatred of Gays. I bring this up because what used to be morally neutral arguments duking it out in the public square, known as the scientific method, where a hypothesis gets tested and it gets verified or it gets denied and you move forward. But nowadays, so many of the purveyors of science with a capital S, Science Inc., they have an interpretive spin. There's an agenda behind their pronouncements. Look at what just transpired this week with the questioning of Senator Rand Paul to Dr. Richard Levine, the Assistant Secretary of Health of all places.
Right.
What I didn't see it, but you did.
I have it in front of me.
Okay, so he was at, by he I mean Dr. Levine, was asked about whether or not he supported children undergoing the mutilation surgery without their parents' permission. What transpired?
Right, that is exactly what Dr. Paul asked, and he asked for a point-blank answer. Do you support basically children being allowed to consent to these procedures over and without their parental consent? And this is where Paul's analysis is so appropriate. He points out, for most of medical history, we wouldn't have let you have a cut sewn up in the ER, but you're willing to let a minor take things that prevent their puberty in an irreversible way without their parents' consent. I mean, this is a bizarre double standard. And then he points out as well the double standard over people freaking out about the use of off-label drugs like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, and doctors being afraid to prescribe them, and people being deplatformed for promoting them, and people being called quacks and nut jobs and whatever for using these drugs empirically that have a very well-established safety profile, so much so that they're over the counter in many countries all over the world. And then the fact that these hormones for transgender therapy, if you want to call it that, are all being used off-label. None of them have formally been approved for this.
Yeah.
And this is sort of a bridge to nowhere. What is the definition of medical therapy? It's so interesting to see how far we've gone from the origins of medicine. As you and I've talked about, the Hippocratic Oath, I have to mention this. The Hippocratic Oath actually starts with, "I swear by Apollo the healer," Apollo being the Greek god of the sun.
Right.
In antiquity, the sun was obviously recognized as something that was a powerful healing force in nature, because people got sicker in the winter. Look at the death curves for any seasonal virus, right? Just to confirm that people get sick and die in the winter, and then they get better in the summer with the sun. But then the Hippocratic Oath also goes on to include an oath that one will not provide any kind of treatment to induce abortion.
Yep. How far we've gone from do no harm.
Right. And also have and I think implicit in that is this respect for the fact that we don't know what the consequences of our therapeutics will be. We can't know a priori. And we may study them and seek to quantify them, but only with time are therapeutics truly proven.
How has the definition of health itself been altered? That's
a very good question. And this is something that I find very fascinating as somebody who has ADHD, because an ADHD is and obviously I've read a lot about it. I've experimented with my own case a lot. Light has a lot to do with ADHD, because all these brain neurotransmitters, hormones are modulated by light. That's how animals know fundamentally when to hibernate, when to migrate, when to mate. Their hormones and neurotransmitters are being modulated by the light in their environment. The polar bear doesn't look at the calendar and say, "Oh, it's October 25th. I better make a burrow." He or she has signals being transduced to their central nervous system through their skin, fur, eyes, whatever, that then eventually triggers some cascade of neurochemical changes that result in them choosing to hibernate, right?
Yeah.
And so with ADHD, it's one of these diseases where people are being told that their kids need medication. And I look at these very young, very bright, intelligent young men, and I think a lot of these kids are just bored. They're bored because the teacher's, telling them to do something that they're not that interested in. And a lot of these people with ADHD go on to be wildly successful. They start companies. They never do that well in school. My suspicion is they're not doing very well in school because they realize that a lot of what their teachers are teaching them is just rote memorization, but doesn't have anything to do with actually succeeding in the world.
Yeah, and you don't have to think. There's nothing critical. You don't own it. You regurgitate it. Yeah, I was diagnosed probably 15 years ago, moderate to severe ADHD. I definitely relate to the traits. Whether or not 50 years from now we'll laugh and remember when we used to call it ADHD, it'll be lumped together in some different configuration, right? What helped me a lot was a book by Alexander Havard called From Temperament to Character, and he looks at the 4 classic Greek temperaments of choleric, phlegmatic, melancholic, and sanguine, and says these are morally neutral modes of being. Most people are one thing with a sort of a minor in another thing. The key to being serene and getting things done is to locate the opposite virtue that the temperament lacks. And you muscularize the weakness and you kind of attain a psychological balance that way. That was helpful. I tried every medication under the sun in multiple doses, only got the bad effects. Didn't help at all. Hated it. Sugar's bad. I mean, we could make a whole show on how to lessen ADHD trait.
We could,
symptoms.
yeah. And it's I mean, I make it very simple for my patients. I just say, look, any stimulus in your environment can alter your behavior. So if you want to make it really simple, eat a clean, simple diet, eliminate these food additives, because we know that some kids can have these weird reactions to them that cause them to be hyperactive. No kid is supposed to have 20 grams of sugar with breakfast. It's in their breakfast cereal.
Yep.
None of them are supposed to have 20 grams of sugar with, a juice pack at lunch and then another 20 grams of sugar at dinner. They're supposed to have some kind of balance and some complex carbohydrates with some fiber and some diversity in their macronutrients, which of course the processed food industry is really aggressively marketing to kids. And again, they're using light to do it. The whole marketing approach is all based on light.
In what way? You mean in the ads?
Well, they know exactly which colors are going to get people to want to buy the food.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
I mean, that's where artificial colorings come in, right? Because why do we like colorful food? Okay. When particles and matter degrades in nature, it gets to a certain color of brown, right? Like dirt does not look appealing. Now, we turn that around. It's a little bit odd that a nicely seared steak looks appealing, right? Because there's a little similarity in the color textures, or color tones there, right? But the steak's got this flavor. It's got this color. There's something about the Maillard reaction, which is a reaction where the caramelization reaction, that's the sort of burntness on the steak that people like for some reason. When you look at fruit, you see that these bright red colors, those are polyphenols, those are antioxidants, those are anti-aging, basically molecules. They help the body to compensate for stress and keep people healthy, right? We look for symmetry in food, just like we look for symmetry in people as a marker of health, because disease often manifests on one side or the other, particularly infections, particularly parasitic infections. So you're looking for symmetry, for example, in your mate, and just in the people you're hanging around with, and you're trying to keep your own. You're like, if one day you wake up and your right hand's much bigger than your left hand, you immediately know something is wrong, even if you don't know what it is, right?
That would be really bizarre.
Well, but it does happen. I mean, people wake up with conjunctivitis. They wake up with sudden, new onset arthritis. I mean, these things happen.
Yeah.
And they know that something's wrong even if there's no pain, right? But to go back to the food, I mean, they know what colors work for people, and these artificial dyes and colorings, there's no artificial color number 4. Or sorry, there's no artificial color like brown number 4. It's artificial red 4, artificial yellow 4. Look at the foods we like in nature. Bananas, strawberries, blueberries, they're blues, they're greens, they're yellows, they're very bright.
Yeah, that's right.
All of those compounds absorb light. All the B vitamins that we use for our metabolism, for our fundamental energy generation processes, they're colorful. In fact, when we dose them in the hospital in an IV, we have to put bags over the IV infusion that have a color that blocks the light. This is why beer bottles and alcohol bottles are brown or green. They're blocking the light that can cause photooxidation of the particles and compounds in the beverages that can make them go rancid. Same thing with olive oils, any kind of oil. That's why the bottles are dark.
They're always dark, yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah. But it's so funny because you start to notice that, and all of a sudden you begin thinking, oh my gosh, my whole life isn't just about the matter that's going into my body. It's not just about the gasoline that's going into my car. It's not just about, these things that I'm handling with my, in my two hands. It's about the light that I'm living under.
Yeah. Yes. McLuhan used to talk about the difference between watching a movie and watching a television show. Now, he died on the last day of 1980, so he foresaw the internet. He described the internet as early as 1962, but he didn't live to see the thing that Al Gore invented up close and personal for many years. And McLuhan, I mentioned earlier, was really big on hidden effects. And sometimes we don't realize that a certain way of presenting something, whether it's a live speaker giving a talk with a microphone, without a microphone, someone who's doing Zoom versus someone who is FaceTiming where the image is smaller and it's upright, it has a different effect from the perception point of view. I wanted to ask you about pornography, because pornography is no longer, I don't know what the proportion is, but I have to assume that less than 5%, maybe way less than that, of pornography materials that are consumed are paper or magazine style. Now it's all internet based, which means this hyper vivid thing, and now with the advent of virtual reality, now we're talking 3D hyper realistic pornographic presentations. Again, deliberate, again, massively addictive. Is there an end game here? I mean, taking things like, well, the devil wants you to sin off the table. How are the oligarchs? Let's say, how are the people who are running the lockdowns? How does porn addiction as a distraction play a role, or as a tool? See what I'm getting at?
I do see what you're getting at. I don't know if I'll say this. I don't have any direct evidence that the people who are in power, these oligarchs, and I agree, we live in an oligarchy now where basically corporations have enough control over government apparatchiks that they can determine what's going to happen, far more than you or I can. Do I think it's possible and conceivable that they're using these sort of, so to speak, digital opiates to pacify the masses and keep them distracted from what's really going on? Of course. If you ask me, could I come up with a better way to distract people, to sap their will, to undermine their physiology, to make them weak, incapable of defending themselves, incapable of advocating for themselves? Could I come up with a better plan? No.
Yeah, right. To be obsessed with self, to be selfish, to be keeping your
and totally disconnected from other people. Because what's interesting about these, relationships is that any relationship, there's a give and a take. There's an element of service in a healthy relationship, right? Even in the most superficial friendship, hopefully you're doing something of, opening the door for your friend when you're going someplace together, picking up their tab occasionally, patting them on the back, listening to them empathetically. There is no give and take with these digital relationships. It's all take. Someone else is giving you some content, right? And the reverse of that is that most of these content creators are doing it in order to get paid in some way, right?
Right.
And the reality is we do have to support our habit of informing and educating the public, so we do sell things to people, right? But it creates this very transactional relationship that has removed us from our local environments, our local communities, right? It's not uncommon now for people to not know their neighbors, to not know anything more about their neighbors than maybe even their first name, how many kids they have in the house, simple things you can observe just by looking out the window for 5 minutes a day, and not anything more than that. Yeah,
that's true. Look at the word apartment. Apartment.
That's funny. Yeah.
You've never been closer together in world history, and yet you really also never been that far apart. E. Michael Jones, in his book Libido Dominandi, makes this point that sexual liberation is a form of political control. As long as you can keep people distracted and keep them with a broken filter to their appetites, they're much more easier to manage, whether it's obesity or porn addiction or what have you. Just get them focused on self. After all, we don't call these photos otheries, right? They're selfies. It's just one army of narcissists looking at each other, but really looking at self, saying, "Look at me, Ma."
Never thought about it that way.
A question here. This is from Nationista Lorraine Thibault. My son had a terrible difficulty sleeping. He spends a lot of time on the computer. Methinks this could be a huge part of his problem. A lot of the questions are related to any recommendations for shut-off times. You recommend a deadline after which the phone gets physically taken from your bedroom, or is there a minimum number of hours per day that you'd recommend?
So let me start actually from the whole perspective of a wireless technology. People don't realize how far back the research on the physical impacts of wireless technology go. There's actually very robust research showing that it has effects on biological systems. I actually just conducted an interview on Wednesday of some researchers looking at wireless effects on public health in 2020. That's going to be published in my newsletter. It's live on my blog. And the reason that I bring that up is that one of the things I began to observe about the way that digital technology and wireless technology disconnects us is that it goes far beyond just using the screen. I remember growing up, my friends and I played with wireless controllers on a hardwired video game console, on a hardwired computer, but we were still having social interaction, right?
Yep.
Now with wireless technology, you can have an entire family in the same house have no interaction with one another for hours on end because they're all doing something else on a different wireless device. And as I became more and more fascinated by the way that young people were using technology, and I'll just give just one example. I have a friend whose two younger brothers living with their very devout, in fact, their father's a pastor. These two young men figured out a way to put tracking devices on their parents' phones so they knew when their parents were coming home. Parents have no idea how their kids are manipulating their technology to get around the rules their parents think are then being observed. Right. Parents need to really they need to understand that their competence with technology should not be overestimated, because they may end up with very severe consequences in how their children end up sort of raising themselves if they don't. Where I'm going with this is this. Wireless technology allows people who are in the same house to be wildly disconnected from one another, and you really fundamentally have no idea what your kid is seeing on the screen in their bedroom for hours and hours on end if you're not in there with them. You think the parental controls are on. You think there's some safeguard against your child. You think the people they're communicating with are trustworthy.
Right.
How on earth do you actually know that?
Yeah, answer, you don't.
You don't.
Right,
exactly. So one of the things I would say is, why are the devices wireless? I actually like the idea of hardwired devices in homes. And I say that partly because a lot of my patients see chronic complaints like headaches or problems with sleeping or nightmares or inability to go back to sleep if they wake up disappear when they start unplugging their Wi-Fi routers or putting their phones on airplane mode. And we know that these wireless radiations from these devices do impact our sleep. So number one is the wireless part is actually a problem in my book. The next thing is, in order to have proper sleep, you actually need to have bright light during the day. Genesis very clearly states that God made a difference between day and night. The difference is that the day is bright, the night is dark. We shouldn't mistake, light as being, it's bad only in its improper context, right? Fake light at night is bad. Hence the saying, nothing good happens after midnight, right?
Right. Also, for people who live in northern climates, my sister lived in Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories. They have three months of dusk, 3 months of day, 3 months of dawn, 3 months of night, and they have to shutter all their windows throughout the summertime because the sun literally doesn't go down.
Right. Exactly.
So, and you mentioned Genesis 1, I think it's Genesis 1 verse 2. We all know this. The first job 1 after creating the heavens and the earth. Let there be light.
Yeah.
That's as primal as it gets. At the head of the line of being is light.
Yeah, and from a very physical perspective, when light hits a chlorophyll molecule in a plant, it is transformed into matter. That's amazing when you really think about it. That's why Einstein's equation E = mc squared. We've all heard of this eccentric scientist who came up with one simple equation to explain a very incredible variety of phenomena that had defied explanation before that. And if E = mc squared, right, if you're worried about the mass that you're consuming in food out of your refrigerator, but you're not worried about the energy that you're absorbing based on light, you're missing a key part of the equation on why you might be fat, sick, diabetic, insomnia, unable to sleep, anxious, depressed, whatever, right? I always point this out to my patients, and I point it out because I get really good results when we start integrating light therapy into their treatment plans. And actually, I have a technology diet that I give my patients that you get if you sign up for my newsletter. And it's just the 10 simple steps that I really like to walk them through.
Just want to connect them. I just put it in the cut and paste into our Facebook page, stillmanmd.com. Is that the closest?
That's right.
distance?
Yeah. Yep. And the email sign up is on the page.
Okay. So like Stillman. Still.
That's right. Stillman.
Nomen est omen. Names are destiny. Stillmanmd.com. Okay. I interrupted you, but I wanted to throw people at the right spot.
Yeah, right. So this problem with sleep that I see so commonly, they've got to get bright light during the day. A lot of them are limiting the amount of light that they're being exposed to. And it's funny, I started measuring my light environment when I got interested in all of this. The amount of light you get in bright sunlight, even in the winter, tens of thousands of lux, 60,000, 70,000, 80,000 is what I was measuring here today. The minute you step into the shade, it drops to 10, 15,000. The minute you go inside, it drops to 2,000, 3,000. The minute you step into a room on the not sunny side of the house, it's 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200 if you're lucky. So people don't realize, and this is why bright light therapy works for seasonal affective disorder. This is why my patients in very dark places, I say, look, you have to have some kind of light therapy device. And when you look back in antiquity, what did people in these locations do? They had a lot of fires. Fires put out an enormous amount of red and infrared light. That makes us feel better about everything. Who doesn't feel better sitting around a campfire? I love fires,
absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
And what's funny is when you talk to people about what kind of fires they really like, they'll actually tell you, I don't really get the same thing from a gas fire. It's not the same experience. It's like cosmetic.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? The gas fires don't put off the same amount of infrared and red light and heat that a wood fire does. We are literally, we are wired to get that amount of light into our lives. This is why, the Native Americans had sweat lodge. The Swedes, Norwegians, Finns, Russians, they have sauna. This tradition of bringing the sun to with us, basically when we leave warm climates in the form of fire, is something that gets conserved across all places. We've ignored it and let it go by the wayside and allowed it to be replaced by pharmaceutical drugs and surgeries, really in a major mistake. Anyone who comes to work with me who's living in a cold place, I recommend the sauna for the winter. I recommend some kind of bright light therapy during the day. Have an office where you've got some bright direct sunlight. That can really help with sleep. And then with cutoff times, 3 to 4 hours is what you need to have your melatonin be released. So minimal screen time, 2 to 3 hours before bed. But then you can also use a lot of different apps, many of which are free, in order to reduce the amount of blue light that your screen is hitting you with. So if if you're looking at me right now, obviously there could be an enormous amount of fake light coming at me, but my screen is very dim and it's very red. And so there's actually very little blue light that I'm actually being exposed to. There's a lot of free apps out there. If people want more details on this, I have a blog post called Blue Light Blocking Solutions, where I give very detailed instructions on what I tell my patients about how to fix their light environment to optimize their sleep.
I use f.lux on my laptop.
Yep, that's one of the favorites.
It goes dark. I have to wonder if there's an etymological tie between sauna and sun. Sud, south. I don't know. Maybe not. I'm always looking for the etymological tie in here, because sometimes the words can connect dots.
Right.
A lot of people are asking any connection between a sun deprivation or sun exposure with hormonal issues, and maybe a tie-in with cancers.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So one of the strongest associations between cancer, and actually, I think I have this right, shift work is actually it's so strongly associated with cancer that the WHO has a statement stating that shift work is a risk factor for cancer. I think it's recognized as like a categories 2A carcinogen. The technicalities of that escape me for the moment. But the point is, there's a very robust association in the literature. The mechanism is that the more light you're exposed to of the blue and green frequencies at night, that delays your melatonin, what we call your melatonin. It's called dim light melatonin onset, which is when your melatonin basically comes out to play. Well, your melatonin is produced in your skin and in your eye during the day in response to bright light, which is why the bright light's super important. And it can actually boost your melatonin levels at night. And it's why I use therapeutic lights with my patients that have red and infrared light, because it spurs melatonin production. But you need the absence of blue and green light for 3 to 4 hours before that melatonin is released from the tissues where it's been produced into your circulation. Now, when it's circulating, that's when it basically turns on all of your cells, rejuvenation, regeneration, healing mechanisms and sequences. And part of those sequences are what protects you from cancer. So that's why shift work has got this association with cancer. And the sun is very protective against cancer because in addition to the synthesis of vitamin D, sunlight actually can, because the hormones and neurotransmitters in our bodies are optically active, sunlight can actually break those down and transform them into other compounds. That's one reason why when people take Accutane, they have to be very careful about their sun exposure, because they can get a very serious burn if they're exposed to too much sun while they're taking Accutane.
Did not know that.
The links here are, there's so many links, it's kind of amazing that it's less well published.
Sure. If the phone is off, I've had parents ask me this. If Junior has a cell phone, or Juniorette, and they say, oh, it's off, meaning it's turned off but maybe not unplugged or powered down altogether. If the cell phone is not turned off but is physically still in the room, is there a Wi-Fi exposure to a phone that's still on, not powered down?
Yeah. It depends on the model, and it depends on the settings. And this goes back to how airplane mode works. I have seen people tell me, or I've had people tell me that they have had phones that even when they're off, they're in the transmit mode. I can't remember which models. I think they were Apple. I know that my phone does not transmit when it's in airplane mode or when it's off. Yeah. But I have meters to monitor these things, and I always quantify my environment, so I know. But it's possible they're still emitting.
Any research on people who fly a lot? Because airplanes, especially at night, I always find the lighting inside aircraft very weird, and inside airports. Not only are the chairs deliberately not conducive for sleeping or even really napping.
It's like they don't want you to sleep at all.
That's right. It's like the get up and get the heck out of here of Muzak they play in restaurants. Lingering.
Right. Yeah. So this is where blue blockers become very effective and very helpful. And I rely on these if, for example, I'm traveling at night. It's so funny this comes up. The other month I was flying somewhere, and I saw someone who was wearing a pair of these. Yeah. And despite her mask, I recognized her, and lo and behold, it was somebody I'd seen years ago at a conference of people who were interested in light. There's not many of us who wear these. But if you see somebody wearing glasses like these at night, they're not wearing their sunglasses at night. What they're doing is they're wearing a pair of red lenses that will block all of the blue light in their environment and prevent that blue light from shutting down their circadian rhythms. And the thing that people need to know about these is that there's a lot of people out there selling them blue light blocking glasses that are not strong enough. Let me show you a pair. So these are, this is a pair that it has got a 20 to 30% tint, and you can see that there's a slight darkness to it. But there's not they're not totally red, right? So when I put on the dark red lenses, a blue light in the environment will disappear. I tell my patients not to wear these when they drive, because it's the equivalent, in my opinion and experience, of taking like 2 Benadryl. Yeah, so very powerful. And also you can't see cop cars if they have blue lights, which is not good. Not good. Right. Yeah, right. But they will put people to sleep. And it's when people come to see me and they tell me they're having trouble sleeping, I always smile, because I think, yes, I can help this person, because I.
Right. Is there a brand name? You and I are not distributors or affiliates. I'm just curious about the super dark ones for nighttime. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Okay. That's right. We need to make another one. Let's build a better Amazon let's build the Gab equivalent of Amazon. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah, right. If you can find a payment processor, that's a great idea. So, yeah, there's so many brands. And it's so funny. I remember I've had a couple people come to me who didn't have a lot of money to spend, and they figured out that there's this model of like DeWalt makes a laser safety glasses that are like $10, and they're super red, and they block all the blue light, and they work like a dream. So you really just need to make sure that the blue blocking glasses that you're getting, if you want them to really protect your sleep, they just got to block blue light. If you don't see blue light coming through them, they work. Now, the best selection for fashion, as far as I'm concerned, is Blue Blocks and Raw Optics.
RAH?
It's Raw, R-A.
Oh, Raw Optics. Okay, let's write that down. Where would you wear these DeWalt blue blockers? After supper, around the dinner table, watching a movie, walking the dog?
Right. Depends on what I explain to my patients, it's all about what it's worth to you. The thing about these glasses is you don't realize that for your whole life, you've been living under artificial life, or artificial light. And suddenly you put these on and you realize how deeply you can sleep. When I started wearing these, I was waking up 2 to 3 times a night and having difficulty sometimes going back to sleep. I now sleep as well as I slept when I was a child or a teenager. When you start to do that for the first time, you think, oh my gosh, sleep has never been this good. I want you to imagine you eat really terrible cafeteria food for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you finally get to go home and you get to eat the food that your mother cooked for you when you were growing up, that she cooks so well.
Yeah.
I'm not engaging in hyperbole here. The power of really good restful sleep is unbelievably good. And so what I tell people is, look, I want you to experiment with these. I want you to wear them from sundown to when you go to sleep, and I want you to observe the effect. Because some of you are gonna come back to me and you're gonna say, wow, Dr. Stillman, this changed my life. My sleep has never been better. My anxiety is under control. My depression is getting better. I have more energy during the day. I have less aches and pains. I'm not eating as much. Thank you so much. I wear them every day at sundown. Other people are going to come back to me and say, you know, I wear them sometimes, but it didn't really impact my sleep that much. And, you know, I just want to look like a normal person when I'm out with my friends.
Gotcha.
And the other reality is that if you do go out, if you do have an evening event, right, not all of which are, you know, we've talked a lot about this, not all of which are sinful and wrong, right? Go to a gala, dinner party, whatever.
Or a nightclub, or a pub, or a tavern.
Or a pub or nightclub, right? You put these on, they will put you to sleep. You are not going to be as funny, as sharp, as clever, as quick-witted, as awake as you would be if you didn't wear them. So you just got to decide what it's worth to you.
Makes sense. That you can say that about a lot of medical treatments, can't you? Well, how well do you want to feel?
And that's where I get so upset with my colleagues who say, you should do this. Well, what's it worth to you? You know, what's your moral standard? What's the risk-benefit profile in terms of how you read the literature? What are the risks worth to you? What are the benefits worth to you? This is where, you know, we get into things like medical mandates, which you and I have talked about, which have been such a hot topic with current events. There's so many, I have to say it, shades of gray here, right? Pun intended. And you have to respect people's decisions based on what they think is right for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes perfect sense. I wanted to ask you about something we talked about a little bit earlier, and it goes to the title, how big tech is hacking your brain. And that is the super popular diagnosis of ADHD. As someone who has it, if it's a thing, I definitely relate to. I mean, if astrology were real and I read it, I go, okay, that just read my soul. Right. Boys seem to be either targeted by teachers who don't like the hyper, the bored boy syndrome. Parents feel guilty. There's a lot of latchkey kids that don't have both parents at home. And so a lot of different meds get thrown at young brains that might be better served with a soccer team membership or something, a hunting trip with dad or fishing or something, cross country. Because this feeds into it, doesn't it? The ADHD brain And I think ADHD is very, very. It's not as titles go. It's not really thought out well. I don't have an attention deficit. I have attention. My brain is like a Ferrari without brakes. It's the opposite problem. Does that resonate?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so you become a little more vulnerable to the incitements of the ping. I have to, all my devices have no notifications. I have no idea. People say, "Did you get my call?" Nope. Gee, I texted you. Didn't get it because it doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't make that sound. So I don't. I'm separated by one floor where I sleep and where my phone is. Or I have to separate it because I'll just check for the next thing, and all of a sudden, where'd the 2 hours go again?
My phone's on airplane mode a lot of the time, especially when I'm with patients.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good if you're on a show too.
Right? Yeah. It's on airplane mode right now. It's funny you bring up the blue light blocking, or you bring up ADHD in conjunction with the blue light blocking glasses, because one of the only studies on blue light blocking glasses was actually done in looking at the treatment of insomnia, which is very common in children who have ADHD, and they did find an effect. So
yeah, that makes sense.
The more this evidence comes in, the more it piles up that light is affecting how people's brains work.
On your blog, you have a post. You're a very good writer, by the way. I'm
Thank you.
Waiting for your book to come out. Patiently. COVID-19 and exposure to wireless radiation.
Right. So that's the interview that I put out, or I recorded on Wednesday. This was a very controversial topic back in the spring when people pointed out that the next generation of cell technology, which shall remain nameless, but which people will find, obviously.
Does it go by a number and a numeral and a letter?
Indeed it does, yes. Okay. Was being rolled out as mortality was taking up. And I found this paper the other week written by Beverly Rubik and Rob Brown. Beverly Rubik is a PhD in biophysics, has a very strong and long history of research in the effects of, let's just call it subtle energies on the human body, because this gets into some very out there stuff. But she's a conventionally trained biophysicist, PhD, very well versed in the science. Rob Brown is a radiologist. People should go listen to his story, because he outlined in our interview just how powerfully his body and his life medically was affected by radiation in his environment, magnetic and wireless. And the reason I asked to interview them is they wrote this paper talking about the potential links between wireless radiation and COVID-19. This association was reported by a number of environmental scientists and physicians and lay people in the spring, and it was very, very aggressively censored. Like, if this video is up tomorrow because we're talking about this, I'll be surprised. But I had a video taken down over this. But
on yourown.com or on YouTube?
On my YouTube channel.
Wow. Well, that's always a sign that people, it's almost a criteria of mine now when I pick a guest or if I'm looking for a speaker for a summit. If your wiki page canonizes you, you're off. You're off my list. If you've been pounded, censored, ritually shamed, that probably means you've got an insight that I need to lean into, because there's a reason why your message has to be not argued with, not debated, deleted.
Right. So exactly. Because the amount of money that the tech companies stand to lose if people realize how wireless radiation is affecting their bodies is virtually all of it. Because people will realize that they can have a better quality of life if they go back to interacting in person, having actual, in-person gatherings, doing things the old-fashioned way. Like, there's a simple joy in writing an actual letter on a sunny day outside. Yep. And when you get a handwritten note from somebody, it has a very different impact than an email.
Oh, right? Yes.
Right, yep. Exactly. I still send thank you notes for that reason. I'm convinced that the kids who grow up under sunlight, living a natural life outside, who do little things, go the extra mile with their thank you cards, are going to be like super kids compared to their competition, who are just being, in my opinion, basically disabled by some combination of fake light, fake food, and very bad thinking in our society. But I digress. There are very troubling similarities between physiological changes that have been observed with exposure to wireless radiation and the pathology we see in cases of COVID-19. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Rubik and Dr. Brown lay this out in great detail in their paper based off of citations in the literature, other peer-reviewed researchers, and anyone can go and look up these studies. And they're not saying that COVID-19 is caused by 5G, which is what it's usually being conflated as an argument to dismiss it. Mm-hmm. What they're saying is excessive exposure to wireless radiation in the environment may have a negative effect on morbidity and mortality. We should be concerned that the rollout of 5G in 2020 may be responsible for a certain amount of increased morbidity and mortality, regardless of what's going on with COVID-19.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And again, there's that environment that's hidden in plain sight. Who even thinks about it? I've often pondered when I'm walking through what used to be called a Wi-Fi hotspot in an airport. Like, am I walking through a weird force field here? We've got 400 people waiting to get on an airliner, and they're all doing this with their glass screen devices. Am I walking into a kind of electro force field? I think the answer is probably yes, I am.
No, it definitely has a measurable effect on biological systems, and there are whole book chapters on the effects of wireless radiation on the immune system, showing a really wide variety of different effects. And it isn't that I have some kind of smoking gun study. Well, actually, Rubik and Brown put out a lot of smoking gun studies. They really make, I think, a strong case. But when you look at the literature on this, there's so many variables. What's the frequency? What body system is being exposed? Is it being exposed at certain times of day? For how long is it being exposed? I mean, I've seen rat studies where the exposure was 6 minutes a day using a density of power that you could easily get from just putting your cell phone up to your face on a normal call, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Those rats were studied in the study I'm thinking of because I was looking at it the other day. They were studied for 30 days. Well, we're going to be using these devices for years of our lives, right?
Yeah.
And there's so many problems with studying this because, they'll say, oh, well, we didn't find a study or association in this study where we looked at cell phone use and brain cancer. Well, did you control for whether or not they had Wi-Fi routers? Did you control for where the wireless was in their homes or their offices? Did you control for how many of them used speakerphone? Did you control for all these different variables? Those of us who actually work clinically with wireless radiation and electromagnetic radiations, and people should go listen. I've said it before, but I'll say it again. Rob Brown talks about how his malignant hypertension on 4 medications disappeared when he moved out of a house where he was sleeping over an inverter for a solar panel and next to a smart meter, right? I can't just take somebody off of 4 medications who's been in the hospital for malignant hypertension. That doesn't happen. I have to do something to change their environment, their diet, their lifestyle in order to get that kind of effect. And, for all we know, a very significant proportion of the pathology that we're, sort of covering over with medications and even exercise, even diet, right, is due to our electromagnetic environment and changes that we're not aware of. And 5G represents a massive change in the amount of radiation that we're being exposed to. And that's why so many of us are concerned about it being rolled out without really, in our opinion, any kind of true regulatory oversight or definitive study of whether or not it's safe.
Yeah. Yeah, as you were talking about this, that will go nameless, although it's a numeral and a letter. This gets out there into speculation, and it's very hard to get your arms around what's true and what is false. But some things stand out to me, and one of them is, in addition to the masks, the 6 feet of social distancing. Why was that chosen? And I wonder if it has anything to do with the outer limit of some electromagnetic field that the body gives off. According to Aristotle and his holomorphism, we are a composite of spirit and matter. We are rational animals. On a biological level, we also have an electrical charge, right? Clear. We've all seen TV shows where a massive amount of electricity. So you can think of the human person as a hyper intelligent piece of electric meat, right? But I don't know about the 6 feet thing there. Do I need to adjust my tiny tinfoil hat to why that was selected?
I think you need to get it this way to get the signals from the aliens just better.
You would say that as a lizard person.
it's remarkable to me that they'll be so adamant about 6 feet or 2 masks or whatever. I look at the level of evidence they have for things like 5G being safe, and I think, what are you doing? This isn't even, I mean, there's no equivalence here in terms of the level of rigor that they want for, shaming people, getting angry at them. I mean, I'm furious that my patients who truly cannot tolerate wearing a mask, and I know there's people out there who say, oh, anyone can wear a mask. Well, tell that to a patient who's 350 pounds and has severe refractory asthma and is on 4 inhalers. You know what I mean? People have the gall to go up to that person and say, why aren't you wearing a mask? Respecting other people and their choices. What happened to respecting their privacy? What happened to taking care of yourself and being responsible for yourself? Not just focus on questions of theology and faith and culture, but also tie this back into health, because in a very real sense, what kind of culture? This is something that I'm not afraid to talk to my patients about. God loves us. He loved us so much to send his son to die for our sins, is rotting our brains. Not be engaged with our communities, not go out there and see people in person and connect with our communities and serve one another. We've got to be mindful of the fact that being a good Christian is more than just reading your Bible. It's more than just following a certain very limited moral code. We have to be very careful with our environment, our lifestyles. And this is where actually, the older I get, the more I respect the Amish. Because, I grew up thinking that they were just these idiosyncratic people stuck in an antiquated worldview. And the more I live through, the modernization of our own culture, I think to myself, my gosh, the Amish really had something when they said, you know what, we're going to let these people experiment with technology. We're cool with our horses and our buggies and our, scythes and our hammers and our very simple tools.
Yep. I saw a meme, again, it might have been on Powerline blog. It's a scientist, researcher putting a microphone to an Amish man with one of these great, half beards.
Right.
And he says, your COVID levels are so low. Why is that? And he goes, we don't have TV.
I saw that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's something going on there. Yeah. I think Christians are nearsighted. Nearsighted about what a human person is. We've over spiritualized the gospel. We talk about souls, but we don't talk about our body as the temple of the Holy Spirit. If the temple of old had to be adorned by God's own commandment with gold and the most sumptuous fineries on its insides and its outsides by its design, how much more in the new dispensation should our bodies, as temples of the Holy Spirit Himself, in a personal way? How much does that effort command our attention? Are we working out? Do we do strength training? What's our diet? We're not Platonists. We don't believe that the soul is stuck in it like a canary in a cage. We're going to get these bodies back in the resurrection of there's another fascinating topic, resurrected, glorified bodies. What? Read 1 Corinthians 15. But I think you're right, to get back to the bodily sense of the human person and the importance of fitness, because our bodies are not accidental. They're not. We shouldn't instrumentalize them. They're part of who we are. We can say I am a soul, but I also am a body. That's my speech.
I agree. And hearing you say that makes me think, though, about one of the most salient difficulties that I've realized my patients face as time has gone on. Right, 100 years ago, a single wage earner in the United States could support a family, buy a home. 1921, I don't even know if the Model T was out yet, but 50, 60 years ago, you could buy a car, you could have a really great quality of life. More and more of my patients are telling me that they have to work in order to make rent, in order to pay taxes, in order to keep up with the inflating price of consumer goods. Mm-hmm. This is all part of, as you and I have talked about, the Great Reset. It's basically the idea is to make it impossible for people to be able to afford a really good quality of life, and then convince them that the government will give them everything that they need, everything they could possibly want, so they don't need to worry about giving the government more and more and more control over their body, their mind, their technology. The government will just take care of them. These are the same people who are telling us that it's okay for children to have their bodies mutilated by doctors, mm-hmm. because, for the last couple of months, Billy has, been thinking that he would rather be Betty Sue, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
These people cannot be trusted at a very fundamental level.
Yeah, I was half serious about Amazon. Amazon just deleted my friend Dr. Ryan Anderson's amazing book, which is written with so much compassion and understanding, When Harry Became Sally. They're not even hiding their campaign. They're
not.
We're all at 1939 Germany again. We just can't see it.
I have Jewish friends who say that.
Yeah, a lot of Jews are kind of noticing this has got a deja vu ring to it here. And also people who were raised in communist countries like Slovenia and Cuba and Venezuela, they're saying it starts with statues, and it goes from there. It's all, history repeats itself. London, Condon. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out. Yeah, no. Okay. Not sure. Let's maybe take one last question here. As fun as it is to dominate your time and learn from you. Let's see here. How to summarize. Are there any foods that you'd recommend that just people stop eating? That they lead to distractibleness, or they lead to brain fog, exhaustion, that kind of ennui? What sort of diet 101? What should you kill off today?
You know what's funny about that question is that if I have to encapsulate my single best piece of dietary advice, it comes from my colleague and mentor, Dr. Anthony G. Beck. He told me, eat a varied and diverse diet. People who end up having weird idiosyncratic reactions to anything that they're eating actually have a tendency to be eating that thing a lot. And when then they eliminate that food for a period of time, they may be able to then tolerate it again. I mean, I've had patients who, and also friends just socially, who eliminated, say, gluten or dairy, and they saw really amazing diseases. I mean, severe diseases like ulcerative colitis. My friend Jim Laird is a personal trainer who tells a great story about he eliminated his ulcerative colitis by eliminating gluten and dairy. And, when I met him, he told me, well, now I can occasionally go out and have a black and tan and a large pepperoni pizza with no problem. So moderation in all things means something a little bit different than I think most people are realizing. When I talk to patients, they begin to realize, oh, wait, I eat the same thing every day. That's a great way to develop an allergy or an intolerance to it. So when in my diet and what I'm eating, and if you keep a varied diet, you don't tend to develop really severe allergies and reactions to these things. So my diet, right, I have like half a dozen different types of grains in my cupboard. I have half a dozen different types of legumes, beans, half a dozen different types of noodles. I have like wheat spaghetti. I have buckwheat. I have, different types of lentil or legume pastas. I mean, I have a really, really, really wide variety of food. People who eat a very limited palate actually end up also with nutritional deficiencies. I mean, people think nutritional deficiencies are not here with us today. I diagnose vitamin A deficiency, vitamin D deficiency, folate deficiency, B12 deficiency, B6 deficiency. I mean, I could go on and on and on, and I give people back these nutrients and they just blossom. Problems they had just melt away. Issues they thought were due to this or that in their environment, stress, triggers in their food like gluten, they just resolve. It's all about bringing the body back into balance, and the best way to maintain balance is to eat a varied and diverse diet. This goes back to Peter when God gave him this revelation that, all the things in creation, he gets to eat them, right? We don't have to follow the kosher laws anymore.
Fantastic. Well, on that note, I want to thank you for your work. I want to throw people to your blog and your newsletter. That's stillmanmd.com. I get it right? stillmanmd.com. Right. Very good. If you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have, brothers and sisters, Dr. Stillman is going to be doing a deep dive in our summit, which is, I'm sorry, what? No, I can't hear. We interrupt this. This just in. We're doing a live, God willing. It depends on how long the oligarchs are going to squeeze the lemon. But we're planning a Restore the Culture conference in Southern California here. But I want to say more proximately, as the opposite of remotely, at the end of April 30th through May 1st, we have the Yes. RestoreTheCulture.com is the name of the website of our previous conference, the summit that Dr. Stillman was in that I mentioned. It's going to be recalibrated for the next one. We can call it a sequel if you like. If you go to restoretheculture.com, you can find all the talks and get all the information that you need. You can buy it now at www.restoretheculture.com. And I want to announce that we are also going to feature Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's going to give a presentation on the corruption involved in clinical trials and the nexus of big pharma and big tech and big government in this next stage of human history which we're living in now, known as COVID mania. We're going to talk about the vaccine and the role of the Great Reset. I just got a yes from the great Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, the former papal nuncio of the United States, leading critic of the things that are happening under Pope Francis, Dr. Sucharit Bhakti, Dr. Peter Bregan, a pioneering psychiatrist, Dr. Pam Popper, Carrie Made, Dr. Jeff Barkey of the American Frontline Doctors, I'm going off the top of my head now, Claire Deeks from New Zealand. Everyone's having the same problems, brothers and sisters. This is a global thing. This is not something that's randomized or concentrated in one little country. It's global, and we're going to talk about it and give you some tools and tactics, no hacks, because there's some work involved, but the website will be the same, restoretheculture.com. I know you're going to love Dr. Leland Stillman. In the meantime, check out stillmanmd.com. Thank you so much for your work and your time tonight, sir. It's always great.
Thank you so much for having me, and God bless everyone.
All right. So you can subscribe to this YouTube channel as well. Hit the notification bell. Don't search for the content. Let the content come to you. In the meantime, be a saint. What else is there?